Hey there, everyone. So in this video, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the APC exam. Uh, in particular, I want to talk about the exam format. Now, the things that I want to cover in this lesson is the difference between the AP Physics 1 and the AP Physics C as far as a format is concerned, the number of questions to expect, how the free response questions are laid out, and basically what to think about when it comes to the calculus part of the APC exam. Now, what's one of the differences between the AP1 and AP-C? Well, for the most part, it covers pretty much the exact same topics as AP1. Both of them cover kinematics, dynamics, gravity and circular motion, energy, momentum, simple harmonic motion, and rotational motion. So for the most part, it's a one-to-one copy. We cover the exact same material. So what's different? Well, there are three inclusions into the APC exam that aren't really covered in AP1. In particular, this is calculus, obviously, but there's also this thing about center of mass and deriving the rotational inertia equations. These two things are slightly touched upon in the AP Physics 1 exam and course, but is a little bit more detailed in APC. Now, it's nothing too crazy. There are small additions. For the most part, it doesn't really cover that many points. So honestly, if you just went straight into the APC, it's not like you're going to be missing much, but in some of the later videos, I will go over those aspects. So what about the format of the exam? That we cover the topics. What about the format? Well, just like the AP1, the APC is also split into two parts. It's got a multiple choice section and a free response section. Now, the multiple choice is significantly shorter, and the free response is also shorter than the AP1. Multiple choice are 35 questions, and the free response is split into three questions. Each one is worth 15 points. For each section, you'll be given 45 minutes. Now, note, this means that you only have a little bit over 1 minute for each question. This is a stark difference from the AP1, where you have close to 2 minutes per question. Now, you might be wondering, well, why is the limit so short? Technically, this is actually only half of the exam. There's two parts of the APC exam. There's the APC mechanics and the APC electromagnetism. Unfortunately, we do not cover the material in the APC electromagnetism section, so we're just doing the APC mechanics. Now, it's worth noting that you only need about 56% of the exam correct in order to get a 5. So even if you are struggling with the time and you aren't able to answer any questions, don't fret because you can still get a really good grade. Um, Now, the other aspect to this is the questions on this exam is a lot more straightforward than AP1. One thing that you're going to notice is when I go over the AP1 is that the AP1 questions are designed to be very tricky. It's designed to really test your understanding. And that means that a lot of times you are kind of expected to put a little bit of time and thought into answering the questions before proceeding. With these questions, that's not the case. The questions are very straightforward. So what they're asking is what they're asking. You just need to know what equation to use or what procedure, what steps to do. And as long as you practice the questions uh, throughout the year and you've experienced these multiple choice questions firsthand and you've done enough practice sample questions, you'll find that you don't need to spend much time before you start processing the question. In fact, eventually, if you get enough questions in, you might just be able to see a few words in the question and immediately know what you have to do. So there's a lot of ways to kind of cut down the amount of time that you need. And even if you do need the time and you aren't able to answer all the questions, you can still get a good chance at getting a 5, and if not a 5, at least a 4. So what are the things that you need to know about the multiple choice section? Well, I already said that there's 35 questions on the multiple choice. One thing that's going to be different about the AP1 is that the APC there's 5 choices for each question rather than 4. Now again, because the questions are much more straightforward and more calculation based rather than conceptual, it's the choices don't really try to trick you. Now, you will, one thing to know is that while you do have access to a calculator and these questions are calculation based, it's one thing to note is that the calculations tend to be simpler. Originally, the APC didn't have a calculator, so they would make the numbers easy to do in your head using a lot of fives, tens, and twos because those are easy numbers to multiply and divide. Uh, they still kind of carry that in, but you do still have that calculator. So, feel free to use it, but you may find that you can go through the entire exam without ever touching the calculator. Now, there is one other thing to mention is that there's not going to be any multi-correct questions. On the AP1 exam, 5 of the 50 questions will end up being multi-correct, meaning that there are two correct answers and you have to select both correct ones. That is not going to be the case here. Every single question, there's only one correct choice. Now, what about the free response? Now, I said before that there are three questions and each one's worth 15 points. One thing to point out is that the three questions are always of the same type. Question one is always a kinematics dynamics question, so it's always going to focus on the concepts of motion, concept of forces, anything like that. Question two is always a conservation question, so it focuses on the idea of conservation momentum and conservation of energy. And question three is always going to be a rotational motion question. So something dealing with rotations, torques, anything like that. So you can always bet on these three questions. Uh, there are going to be a lot of practice questions that you can find online. You can look up on AP course, type in APC free response questions, and you can find many years going back. And you can practice these and get a handle of what the kinematics questions look like, conservation, and rotational. And you will find that these questions actually look very similar to the AP1 questions, obviously with a little bit more focus on calculation. One thing to note is that these questions are very balanced. Typically, the tougher one of the questions is, the easier the other two are. And in particular, question three is going to be where you will find a lot more difficulty. Like I said, question one and two, very similar to what we do in class in AP1. Question three is kind of like an oddball. Now, again, this is on average, but for the most part of the calculus, only one of the questions is going to deal with calculus, and it can be question three. If question three is the one that with the calculus, the other ones are going to be a lot easier. You kind of actually almost want the calculus to be on question one, because that's going to make that those questions tend to be simpler than question three. If question three's got the calculus, it's kind of a doozy. Uh, Now, in the AP1 exam, one of the questions is always a experimental design, and the APC kind of follows that. It's very likely that one of the questions will be experimental design, where you have to kind of come up with an experiment uh, to test something. So for the most part, just by going through AP1, this course, you're going to get practice with this experimental design. But if you want more questions, you can feel free to look at the APC free response. And again, you can find plenty of examples. Now, one thing to also point out is that there's a lot of room for partial credit. Even if you don't really know what you're doing, but you kind of have an idea of what you have to do, uh, as long as you try something, there's a chance that you might be able to get some credit. So always try something. Never leave a section blank. And also, this is kind of goes back to practicing because if you practice enough free response questions, you will start to get a handle of what are the things that the exam is looking for, what type of questions they're asking about. When they say this, what do they want you to do? You kind of get a handle of what are the go-to as far as what they're looking for, and if you can keep that in mind and you know what you should be expected to start with or to use, then you can get a lot of partial credit for these problems, even if you aren't fully comfortable or understand exactly what's expected of you. And you want every credit as possible. Again, 56% to get a 5. Now, how much of the exam is calculus based? Well, a rough estimate based off the 2012 exam puts the percentage close to about 20%. It could vary a little bit. Sometimes it can be closer to 25. Sometimes it might be low to like 15%. Now, one thing to point out is even though this is the average percent, this is assuming all the questions that can be answered in calculus. So there are actually a lot of questions where there is the choice to use an algebraic version. I'll show you examples of the types of questions later on, but there are some questions that in this 20% that actually could have been answered algebraically instead of calculus based. So again, this percent is a little bit lower. And again, and I want to keep reminding you that 56% needed for a 5. So even if you don't learn any of the calculus, you don't understand anything like that, you just do all the algebra questions, you still have a really good shot at getting a 5. Now, what are the types of calculus that you need? For the most part, you only really need to be able to do four things. You need to be able to do derivatives and integrals. And you only need to do that for polynomial functions and trigonometric functions. For those who are taking calculus or will be taking calculus, have already taken it, you'll be good with that. You don't really have to cover anything. It's still useful to watch the videos because there are a few things about the calculus that you have to be aware of, but for the most part, you don't have to worry too much about it. For those who don't haven't taken the calculus and don't know what derivatives and integrals mean, don't fret. It's these two part aspects are actually really easy to learn, and one of the future videos I'll go over this aspect. So yeah, I'll end up talking about this in a lot more detail later. And that's pretty much it. As long as you are do the practice problems, this should be a fairly straightforward and hopefully easy 5 for you. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, have a great day.